my remarks are coming to you as an individual who is interested in stewardship and as an economist. I do actually have 5 actions that I think are important. There's lots of stuff going on, and I think there's been a lot of progress in the last 4 years on stewardships. I'm going to start with a personal anecdote, going back to my individual perspective on stewardship. I was driving back to Alberta, back to Edmonton where I live, from Saskatchewan. My parents live in northern Saskatchewan. They have a house in a provincial park. We've been blessed throughout my life. I've been able to go there and enjoy nature. So I was driving back to Edmonton last winter with my daughter. She's 7 years old, and she just hates coming back to Edmonton. And she says, "Why do we have to live in this city?" And I don't know, I have no good answers for that. I'm not a farmer. And then she was looking, we have to drive over the Sherwood Park Freeway, which over the last 10 years has essentially become an industrial wasteland between Edmonton and Calgary. And not for lack of planning. In fact, probably with the best intentions and based on the kind of advice that councils get from people like me on intensive zoning in certain areas, the area has become a garbage dump. There's recycling facilities, and then there's this huge scrap pile right beside Welcome to Edmonton. So my daughter was looking out the window and she says, "Mom, it's wrong to have so much garbage." And what I appreciated, and anyone who has children will appreciate, is that 6- and 7-year-olds have this very strong sense of what's right and wrong and morality. And it made me think about some of my research, because what we know is that from the psychological, biological, and economic evidence and experiments, that altruism and cooperative behavior are in fact hardwired, or believed to be hardwired traits in humans and primates. And that these behaviors, with the right kinds of social structures, are self-reinforcing. But without those self-reinforcing structures, that cooperative behavior, or that motivation for stewardship, disintegrates. So let me give you a tangible example. On this same drive, I was looking at all the scrap heaps and the garbage and the litter, and I was frankly getting pretty irritated. Where are the policy makers? Why do people litter? Blah, blah, blah. And my overwhelming feeling was one of discouragement. I changed my light bulbs in my house. I try to not use too much water. I try to take a steel mug to Tim Hortons and succeeded about 25% of the time. And yet, when I look around me, the public spaces that I live in as an urban citizen are being continually degraded. So what I think we need to think about is how to reinforce the ethic of stewardship. And I want to talk about some of the successes, because I think we've done a really good job on the policy frameworks that we need to support stewardship. We've got data sets, and some of the successes I would point to are land use, watershed, and regional planning frameworks that are not only in Alberta but in provinces throughout the country. Policies to implement these, including wetland mitigation regulations and compensation regulations. There's been increased donations to lands under things like the EcoGift program, and there's cooperation between stewardship groups at prioritizing needs, at data sharing, and at pooling funding for some initiatives. So what is not working? Well, when we look at some of the primary activities of stewardship organizations, they focus effort, and I'm not saying this is across the board, but certainly there seems to be an emphasis on protecting land, and we protect that land through leases or purchases. Most of those purchases happen on private lands outside of the area where urban residents might enjoy or experience them. And in fact, there's been lots of studies of the U.S. wetland banking programs that show that while we've made great strides in protecting habitat, protecting water quality and source water, we've actually had incredible losses of recreational and urban values that had been provided by wetlands. So there's a substitution of stewardship away from the urban areas where it's costly and out to private lands in rural areas where it doesn't cost so much. So I'm not saying that that's not important. It's a very important element, but perhaps it's time to rethink some of this perspective. Another thing is this focus on paying for stewardship. I work on this area of research. I work on designing incentives with a lot of people that are in this room. I have been looking at different types of programs for this. These programs are an essential part of stewardship. However, again, the evidence experimentally and in real life from Australia and other places where they've been using these programs is that these external rewards and motivations are crowding out intrinsic motivations for stewardship. So the worst news is that in the experiments that we've been looking at, when people voluntarily provided a public good, like protecting the environment or like stewardship, and then we start paying the subjects to do the same thing. Once we take those payments away, they don't go back to voluntary stewardship. So you can't go backwards. And so I think that, yes, payment programs are important, especially in areas where we can't get up to where we need to be in terms of water quality, but we might need to rethink the model about how to reward good behavior instead of paying people that have degraded their landscape. So in terms of my recommendations for actions, I think that need to be emphasized, and I don't necessarily see them here on the 6 priorities except under priority number 4. If we look at what motivates people for volunteerism, these are the things that people say. The primary reason is this idea of fairness and obligation. What is right and wrong? It's right to do stewardship actions. That's reinforced by social interactions and seeing results, which is something that Leanne Milburn talked about yesterday. People like to go out on their land and plant trees. Why? Because they get to see them. And I think that that's actually very important, that people see reinforcement of their good behavior through things like parks and areas instead of being zoned into an urban, commercial, industrial landscape and everything else is taking place outside of their experience. So these are my recommendations, and these are things that we know are necessary to foster cooperation. First is to enforce punishment for bad behavior. So what is the role for stewardship groups in monitoring and then working perhaps with government or by themselves to either socially sanction bad actors or to have stronger enforcement mechanisms? Secondly, let's look at ways to reward good actors and change the design of our stewardship programs so that we're not creating this expectation that you have to be paid to provide environmental goods and services. Number 3, develop opportunities for people to experience the results of good stewardship. And that means start focusing the effort for stewardship not only on habitat protection and source water protection and all of those important things, but let's look at the human benefits from ecosystems and start putting them back in our urban landscape and work on that urban environmental interface. Let's face it, if you want to build political support for stewardship, 75% and increasing are living in urban areas. Finally, I would suggest that stewardship community itself has siloed itself by being associated primarily with environmental issues and ecological issues around sustainability, and that we might benefit from making alliances with other organizations to foster pro-social behavior. So not only reinforcing stewardship of the environment, but stewardship of all of our public space, protection of other human and social values within that. And then I think that that would reinforce stewardship and it would reinforce the other behaviors that I think we desire as a society. Let's face it, we're unlikely to provide more money for trees when we're walking past homeless people in the streets, and maybe those problems are connected to each other. Out of those recommendations then, I would add the further bullet in addition to number 6. A specific request for funding go to local organizations for developing a pro-social agenda that supports social capital and local stewardship actions. And what I'm not talking about is funding for land purchases and stuff like that, but for the intangible creation of that social capital. And I think we've been hearing those themes, and I'm sorry if I've taken more than 10 minutes and I'm done. Thank you.